Here is a number that should keep you up at night. Between 1997 and 2012, just 15 years, raccoon populations in the southern Everglades dropped by 99.3%. Not 50%. Not 70%. 99.3%. Opossums? Down 98.9%. Bobcats? 87.5% gone. Marsh rabbits, cottontail rabbits, and foxes? Scientists stopped seeing them at all. Not fewer of them. None. Florida released 100 rabbits fitted with radio trackers into the Everglades as part of a study. By the end of 1 year, 80% of them had been eaten by a single species. One species, and the other 20% were gone too. The Burmese python has consumed the most ecologically important wetland in North America, and Florida has been fighting it with bounties, competitions, hired hunters, and $2 million a year, and the snake is still winning. But here is the part nobody is talking about. In the forests of Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, where these pythons actually came from, there is no crisis. The python is not running wild. It is not eating everything in sight. It exists as one animal among many, kept in check, quietly, by something that Florida simply does not have. And that something is not a trap. It is not a bounty program. It is not a 10-day hunting competition with a $25,000 prize. It is a predator. A living, breathing, natural weapon, co-evolved over millions of years to eat pythons, fear nothing, and thrive in the exact kind of humid swampland that Florida has in abundance. Florida does not have it. And that is the entire problem. If this is your first time on this channel, we cover what is happening to the places people are actually trying to live. The real costs, the hidden forces, the things that shape property values, quality of life, and the future of entire regions. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. To understand why Florida is losing, you have to understand how this started. In the 1980s, Burmese pythons were one of the most popular exotic pets in the United States. They were sold in pet stores across the country, sometimes for as little as $20 as hatchlings. People bought them thinking they would be manageable. What they did not factor in is that these snakes grow fast, and they do not stop. A Burmese python that fits in your hand as a hatchling can reach 12 feet within 3 years. Adults regularly hit 15 to 17 feet. The largest one ever captured in Florida measured more than 18 feet and weighed close to 200 pounds. That is not a pet. That is an apex predator in your living room. So people did what people do when a project gets out of hand. They let the snake go. Some were intentional releases. Owners who could not handle them, could not feed them, or simply did not want them anymore, drove out to the Everglades and opened the lid. Others escaped from damaged breeding facilities during hurricanes. Hurricane Andrew in 1992, one of the most destructive storms in American history, tore through a python breeding operation in South Florida and released hundreds of snakes directly into the Everglades at once. By the year 2000, something had shifted. Scientists were not just finding occasional pythons. They were finding breeding populations, nests, hatchlings, multiple generations of wild-born snakes. The Burmese python had arrived, and it had nowhere to go but grow. What made the Everglades so perfect for them? First, the climate. The Everglades sits in a subtropical zone, warm and wet almost year-round, with no sustained freezing temperatures to cull the population. Pythons are cold-blooded. Cold kills them. But South Florida rarely gets cold enough for long enough to do real damage. Second, the habitat. The Everglades is an enormous, marshy, heavily vegetated wilderness, the exact kind of environment pythons evolved in. They are expert swimmers. They can hide in water for hours without surfacing. Their patterned scales make them nearly invisible in vegetation. In a landscape built from sawgrass, mangroves, and brackish water, they are ghosts. Third, and most importantly, they had no natural enemies. Every animal that could threaten a large python in Southeast Asia simply does not exist in Florida, and that absence created a biological vacuum. The python stepped into it and filled it completely. There is one more biological advantage the python carried into the Everglades that rarely gets discussed. Burmese pythons are extraordinarily tolerant of salt water. They can swim in brackish and even open salt water for extended periods. That means the natural barrier that water provides the rivers, the tidal channels, the open bays, does not stop them the way it would stop most terrestrial predators. In 2021, researchers documented pythons expanding north along the edges of the Everglades into areas where they had not been seen before. The population is not contracting. It is spreading. By 2012, scientists were finding pythons with 71 alligators in their stomachs. They were finding pythons that had swallowed deer, bobcats, and wading birds. In one documented case, researchers observed a Burmese python swallow a 7-pound white-tailed deer, nearly 70% of its own body weight in a single meal. The snake was not behaving unusually. It was behaving exactly as it would in Southeast Asia. The difference is that in Southeast Asia, something was hunting it back. In 2021, a king cobra at the Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve in Singapore was photographed eating a reticulated python whole. It took 45 minutes. There is a famous photo circulated widely of a king cobra and a reticulated python found dead together in a tangled coil in Southeast Asia. The python had managed to constrict the cobra. The cobra, already dying, had injected enough venom that the python died too. Neither won. But neither backed down. That is the world the Burmese python evolved in. A world where it has enemies. The king cobra, Ophiophagus hanna, is the longest venomous snake on Earth, reaching up to 18 feet in length. Its scientific name literally means snake eater. It is the only snake in the world with a diet that consists almost exclusively of other snakes. And pythons are on the menu. The Smithsonian National Zoo lists the king cobra's diet specifically as Asian rat snakes, domans, and pythons up to about 10 feet in length. It hunts by scent following chemical trails through dense vegetation, locating pythons hidden in burrows and under root systems. It strikes fast, injects a neurotoxic venom that begins paralysis almost immediately, and swallows its prey whole. A full-grown adult Burmese python is too large for even a king cobra to safely take on. But the king cobra does not need to kill the big ones. It needs to kill the young ones, the hatchlings, the juveniles, the snakes in their first 1 to 3 years of life, before they reach a size where nothing can touch them. Female Burmese pythons lay 50 to 100 eggs at a time. Those eggs need to survive. Those hatchlings need to survive. And in Southeast Asia, a significant number of them do not, because predators like the king cobra, mongooses, large birds of prey, and other co-evolved animals are waiting. The prey animals of Southeast Asia have also spent millions of years developing awareness of pythons. They know what they smell like. They avoid the places pythons hide. They run. They have the instincts to survive encounters that Florida's animals simply do not. Researchers at Virginia Tech studying the mammal collapse in the Everglades noted that one reason for the dramatic and rapid decline is that Florida's prey species are, in their exact words, naive. These animals have not shared a habitat with a large constrictor snake for millions of years. They do not know to be afraid. A raccoon walking to the water's edge, the exact place a python waits, has no biological alarm going off. No learned behavior that says, stay back. That naivete is costing them their lives. But here is the deeper point that rarely gets discussed. Florida is not just missing the predator. It is missing the entire co-evolved ecosystem that keeps the python from going unchecked. In Southeast Asia, the python is one piece of a puzzle that has been assembling itself for millions of years. Every predator, every prey species, every piece of vegetation, every seasonal pattern they have, all evolved in relationship to each other. The Everglades never had that relationship. The python arrived and found a landscape full of animals that had never needed to fear it. And the results have been catastrophic. Florida is not doing nothing. To be fair, the state has thrown serious resources at this problem. The Python Action Team removing invasive constrictors, known as Patrick, has been operating since 2017. The state allocates $2 million annually to python removal efforts. The Florida Python Challenge runs for 10 days every year, drawing hunters from across the country and Canada, competing for prize money that now reaches $25,000. In the first 8 months of 2025, hunters removed more than 2,700 pythons, roughly matching the total from all of 2024. Governor Ron DeSantis held a press conference in October 2025 in front of a podium that read, "Python be gone." He credited a new partnership with Miami-based company Invasive for tripling the removal rate. In July 2025 alone, 748 pythons were removed, more than in the entire previous year combined. That is a real achievement. The numbers are real. The effort is real. The people doing this work are going out into alligator-infested swampland at night, navigating broken GPS units, dragging 100-pound snakes through water and mud, and doing it month after month. But here is the problem. A female Burmese python can lay up to 100 eggs per year. She does not need a partner to find male pythons, can detect a female's chemical trail from miles away during breeding season. She finds a suitable spot, lays her clutch, coils around it to keep it warm, and guards it until the eggs hatch. Then those hatchlings, if they survive, will be ready to reproduce themselves within 3 to 5 years. The math does not favor the hunters. Researchers conservatively estimate there are between 100,000 and 300,000 Burmese pythons currently living in the greater Everglades ecosystem. Some estimates run higher. Since the year 2000, more than 23,000 have been removed. That number, while significant, represents at best a fraction of the actual population. The detection problem makes everything worse. Pythons are masterful hiders. They are cryptically colored, slow-moving much of the time, and perfectly suited to disappearing into the exact kind of dense vegetation that covers the Everglades. Researchers have noted that the detection rate for Burmese pythons in their habitat is under 1%. You can walk past a 1-4-foot snake and never know it was there. Trained detection dogs were tried. They were more effective than humans, completing searches 2.5 times faster. But in Florida's summer heat, a dog cannot sniff while panting. The dogs could only cover about 5 miles per day before heat became a limiting factor. Environmental DNA sampling, testing water for genetic traces of the snake, can confirm presence or absence in a water body. But it cannot tell you where the snake is. You still have to find it and remove it manually. Live food traps do not work. Burmese pythons are ambush predators. They do not need to search for food. There is food everywhere. A trap with bait sitting in the middle of the Everglades is not interesting to a snake that could have swallowed 3 rabbits this week without leaving its resting spot. Pheromone traps designed to attract pythons during breeding season show some promise. But breeding season is limited, and the research is still early. The most effective removal tool, by a significant margin, has been what biologists call the Judas snake technique. A python is captured, fitted with a radio transmitter, and released. During breeding season, that snake will lead researchers directly to other pythons gathering to mate. One tracked snake can lead to the removal of dozens more. It works well, but it requires an enormous amount of labor, logistics, and funding to scale. And even at scale, it is still a removal program, not a suppression program. It addresses the symptom. It does not address the cause. To put that in concrete terms, a removal program takes snakes out of the system. A suppression program would need to reduce the population fast enough that reproduction cannot keep pace with extraction. Given that a single female can add up to 100 new snakes to the ecosystem every year, the 2,700 removed in 2025, a historic record represents a rounding error against a population generating millions of eggs annually. Consider what that scale of effort has cost financially. Between 2004 and 2021, federal and state agencies, along with at least one major nonprofit, spent $10.6 million on python control in Florida alone. The United States as a whole spends over $120 billion annually managing invasive species across all categories. Globally, the number rises to $1.4 trillion. roughly 5% of the entire world economy, consumed every year by the downstream costs of species that arrived somewhere they did not belong and found nothing to stop them. The python is not even close to the most expensive invasive species in America, but in Florida, it is the most ecologically destructive. And the money being spent on its removal is money that is not going to habitat restoration, water management, or the dozens of other conservation challenges the state faces simultaneously. Florida is pulling snakes out of the Everglades as fast as it can, but the snakes are reproducing faster. Let us go back to the forests of Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. The Burmese python in its native range is not a creature without enemies. It is a creature that exists within a web of ecological relationships built over millions of years. Young pythons, in their first 2 years of life, before they exceed roughly 6 feet, face significant predation pressure. Large raptors, including crested serpent eagles and several species of hawk eagle, are documented python predators. Wild boar prey on python eggs and nests. Civets, monitor lizards, and other opportunistic predators take hatchlings when they can find them. And then there is the king cobra. The king cobra's range runs directly through the Burmese python's native territory. Both species share habitat in the mangrove swamps, rice paddy edges, bamboo forests, and river deltas of Southeast Asia. The king cobra did not evolve alongside the Burmese python by accident. These two animals have been in ecological dialogue for millions of years. The king cobra hunts by smell, following the chemical signature of other snakes through dense vegetation. It does not need to see its prey. It is fast, highly maneuverable, and armed with a venom potent enough to kill an elephant. While a fully grown adult Burmese python is a dangerous target even for a king cobra, juveniles and subadults are well within reach. In addition to the direct predation pressure, there is the behavioral effect, what ecologists call the landscape of fear. Animals that live under predation pressure modify their behavior. They move differently, hide more, reproduce with more caution. In Southeast Asia, even a Burmese python that survives to adulthood carries that behavioral heritage. It is wary. It is not an apex predator acting with complete impunity. In the Everglades, the python behaves as though nothing can hurt it, because in the Everglades, nothing can. That behavioral freedom has measurable ecological consequences beyond just what the snake eats. When a top predator operates without check, it does not simply consume its prey. It reshapes the entire landscape around it. Prey animals begin changing how they use the habitat, avoiding areas where pythons concentrate, which leaves those zones ecologically dead. The species that depended on those prey animals feel the pressure cascading outward. The python did not just eat the Everglades mammals, it rearranged the entire ecological architecture of the place. The king cobra itself is not doing particularly well in its native range, by the way. Habitat loss, overhunting for the skin and medicine trade, and collection for the exotic pet industry have reduced king cobra populations significantly enough that they are now listed as vulnerable by the IUCN. Vietnam and China consider them critically endangered nationally. Thailand, China, Vietnam, and Indonesia all offer them legal protection. That is the brutal irony at the center of this story. The animal that naturally controls Burmese python populations in the wild is itself threatened partly by the same exotic pet trade that sent the pythons to Florida in the first place. The same global market for exotic animals that flooded American pet stores with baby pythons in the 1980s was simultaneously draining Southeast Asian forests of the predators that keep those pythons in check. Florida got the python, Southeast Asia lost the king cobra, and the Everglades got the bill. Could the king cobra be introduced to the Everglades as a biocontrol measure? This question has been considered by researchers. The honest answer is, probably not. And here is why. Introducing a species to control another invasive species is called classical biological control, and it has a complicated history. The mongoose was introduced to Hawaii and several Caribbean islands in the 1880s to control rats and snakes on sugarcane plantations. It worked on the snakes. It also devastated native bird populations that had never co-evolved with a ground-dwelling predator. the mongoose became its own invasive disaster. Japan imported mongooses to Amami Oshima Island in 1979 to control the habu snake. It took until 445 years and 32,000 mongoose removals to finally eradicate the mongoose from the island. A venomous snake as large and as capable as the king cobra, introduced to a complex wetland ecosystem in the continental United States, carries enormous risk. It could expand beyond the Everglades. It could prey on native species. It could create a second crisis while trying to solve the first. The point is not that the king cobra should be introduced. The point is that Florida's problem exists in the first place because the natural predator-prey balance of the Burmese python's native range was never replicated here. The snake arrived in a vacuum, and a vacuum, in ecology, is always filled. Now, why does any of this matter to someone looking at the low cost of living in South Florida? Because the Everglades is not just a swamp. It is the economic engine of South Florida. A 2025 report from the Everglades Foundation found that the wetland contributes $31.5 billion annually to the regional economy through real estate values, tourism, fisheries, flood protection, and drinking water supply. Over 50 years, that adds up to more than $1 trillion. The national parks in South Florida, Everglades National Park, Big Cypress, Biscayne, draw nearly 2 million visitors annually. That tourism generates hundreds of millions in local spending, supporting thousands of jobs in Homestead, Miami, and surrounding communities. And Homestead itself, for those who do not know, is one of the genuinely affordable places to live in South Florida. Average rent runs around $1,377 a month, roughly 16% below the national average. It is close to the Everglades, close to the Florida Keys, and significantly cheaper than Miami. For people looking to live in South Florida on a real budget, the Homestead and South Dade corridor has historically been one of the few options that actually pencils out. But the Everglades underpins all of it. When people talk about the cost of living in South Florida, they are usually talking about rent, groceries, and gas. What they rarely factor in is the invisible infrastructure the ecosystem provides. The flood buffering that keeps insurance rates from climbing, the clean water flowing through the treatment system before it reaches the tap, the fish stocks that support commercial and recreational fishing up and down the coast. That infrastructure is biological. It cannot be replaced with a line item in the state budget. The ecosystem filters drinking water for millions of residents. It buffers storm surges. It supports the fishing industry and the wildlife that draws visitors, the wading birds, the alligators. The unique subtropical landscape is being quietly dismantled by a snake that arrived because someone did not want to deal with a pet anymore. There is also something else happening that actually creates unusual economic opportunity. Inversa Leathers, a Miami-based company, has found a way to turn the python crisis into a market. They buy python skins from state-contracted hunters, send them to tanneries in the US and Europe, and produce luxury leather goods, wallets, boots, belts, handbags, and other products all made from the invasive Burmese python. The fashion house Gabriella Hearst featured Inversa python leather in her spring-summer 2025 runway collection. Vogue covered it. She called the company a game changer. Inversa's model has had a measurable effect on removal rates. Since the state partnered with them, the financial incentive for hunters went up significantly, and so did the number of snakes removed. FWC management workload dropped 89% in the same period because Inversa handles logistics that previously fell on state staff. The company reports that each python leather product represents roughly an 89% improvement on carbon emissions compared to traditional leather, with land use dropping to nearly zero. They are backed by NOAA and Conservation International. This is unusual economic territory. There are people making a living, not a windfall, but a real income hunting invasive pythons in the Florida Everglades. The South Florida Water Management District pays contractors $50 for the first 4 feet of a captured snake, then $25 per foot after that. Hourly rates range from $13 to $30 depending on the zone and priority level, capped at 10 hours per day. Florida couple Christina Kraus and Aaron Mann set a monthly removal record in July 2024, capturing 87 pythons in 1 month. Their haul included a confirmed nest with 33 hatchlings and a 4-foot, 9-2-pound Burmese python. That is not going to make anyone rich. The work is grueling long nights in alligator-infested swamps, broken equipment, heat, and long stretches with nothing to show for it. But for people already living in South Florida, already comfortable in that environment, it is an income stream that literally did not exist 20 years ago. The broader economy around python removal is also growing. Python challenge tourism, media attention, specialty gear, guide services. A small but real ecosystem of economic activity has developed around a problem that is not going anywhere soon. Let us zoom out. The Burmese python problem is not really a Florida problem. It is a symptom of a global pattern that shows no signs of slowing down. The exotic animal trade has introduced invasive species to virtually every corner of the world. Lionfish, native to the Indo-Pacific, are now devastating coral reef ecosystems throughout the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Asian carp imported to the United States in the 1970s to clean aquaculture. Ponds have taken over the Mississippi River basin and are pushing toward the Great Lakes. Green iguanas, red-eared slider turtles, Nile monitor lizards, tegus, Argentine black and white tegus. South Florida alone hosts dozens of established invasive reptile populations. At least 54 non-native reptile species have established breeding populations in Florida. 27% of all established non-native reptile species in the entire world are now found in Florida. Let that number sit for a second. 1 state, 1 climate zone. A quarter of the world's established invasive reptile problem. Florida is ground zero for a global crisis in invasive reptiles. The Burmese python is just the largest and most visible of them. The pattern underneath all of it is the same. An animal arrives somewhere new, finds no predators, finds abundant prey, and expands until something stops it. In most of human history, that something was geography. Oceans, mountain ranges, and deserts kept ecosystems separated for millions of years. The global pet and wildlife trade removed those boundaries in a matter of decades, and no regulatory framework has come close to keeping pace with the damage. What the research consistently shows is that the most effective solutions are the ones that work with ecological pressure rather than against it. You cannot hire enough hunters to outpace a python that lays 100 eggs a year. You cannot build a trap that outsmart an ambush predator that does not need to search for food. The research directions showing the most promise are pheromone-based disruption, interfering with the chemical signals pythons use to find mates during breeding season, thermal imaging via drone to detect snakes by body heat, genetic approaches that could theoretically suppress reproduction. The Judas snake program, expanded and better funded. None of these are the king cobra, but all of them are trying to mimic what the king cobra does naturally: find the snakes where they hide, disrupt their reproduction, reduce the population from within the biology of the animal, rather than from the outside through brute force. The co-evolved predator is the gold standard. Florida does not have it, and introducing it is not safe. So the state is left doing what humans always do when we break something: ecological spending enormous amounts of money trying to manually replicate what nature does for free when it is left intact. The Everglades is worth $31.5 billion a year to the regional economy. The python, by comparison, arrived at a cost of $0 and has been generating a tab ever since. For the people living in South Florida, especially in the affordable corridor around Homestead and South Dade, this is not an abstract story. The health of the Everglades determines property values, drinking water quality, flood risk, tourism jobs, fishing income, and the basic livability of the region. The python is a direct threat to all of it. Florida is fighting back. The numbers are getting better. The removal rates in 2025 are genuinely historic. The hunters doing this work are real. The effort is real. And the political will is real. But without the one thing Southeast Asia has a predator that has co-evolved with the python for millions of years, that knows where it hides, that knows when it is most vulnerable, that needs no budget and no paycheck And no off-season. Florida is always going to be chasing a moving target. The secret weapon is not a gun or a trap or a bounty program. It is a 5-foot venomous snake that eats other snakes for a living, and it lives on the other side of the world. That is the story the Everglades tells when you follow it to its source. One decision, multiplied by millions of pet store transactions, compounded by a hurricane, and now embedded in one of the most economically important ecosystems in the United States. If you are thinking about what the Everglades crisis means for the people actually living in South Florida, the cost of housing, the jobs that exist because of this problem, the communities built around one of the most biodiverse places on the continent, we will keep covering that. Subscribe so you see the next one when it drops.